The weight was meant to break her, not just her back, but her spirit. Lady Seraphina was an artist of quiet cruelties, and today's masterpiece was a tower of wicker baskets, each filled with wet, heavy laundry. The rough edges dug into Nerissa's arms, and a thin, icy trickle of soapy water snaked down her worn dress, making her shiver in the crisp morning air. She kept her head down. More importantly, she kept her eyes down, because looking up was a luxury she couldn't afford. Notice was just another word for pain. Her stepsisters, Veda and Lyra, stood on the porch, wrapped in fine wool cloaks the color of cream. They were beautiful, polished stones next to her own rough, muddy existence. "Do be careful, Maid," Lyra chirped, her voice like glass shards. "Wouldn't want you to trip over your own feet and soil the Alpha's linens." Veda snickered, a sound like a spoiled cat. She probably would. Clumsiness is a trait of the lowborn, isn't it? Nerissa's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Instead, she focused on the burn in her biceps, on the ache in her spine, on the singular, desperate goal of getting these baskets to the clothesline without giving them the satisfaction of a stumble. Deep down, she knew the truth. Their words were just echoes of her own deepest fear. That they were right. That she was nothing more than the dirt under their elegant slippers. Maybe it was fate that she was born to serve them, to carry their burdens while they carried none of their own. She didn't know what scared her more, the sneer in their voices, or the part of her that believed she deserved it. As a result, she just bit her lip and took another shuffling step. The scent of lye soap and her own quiet misery filled her nose. No matter how hard she tried to be invisible, they always found a way to see her, to remind her of her place. Her world was small, a cage built of chores and insults, and she had long ago stopped rattling the bars. Survival was a quieter art. It was the art of enduring. So, she endured. She shuffled past the porch, her bare feet cold against the damp earth, the sisters' laughter a whip against her back. Her destination was the village square, a task meant to take an hour that would now take 3 because of the impossible load. Because of that, every muscle in her body screamed in protest. Still, she kept walking, a ghost in rags, a creature of dust and duty, heading toward a town that barely knew she existed.
Power was a cold, lonely throne. From the stone balcony of the Alpha's lodge, Caden watched his pack move through the village below, a sea of heads, a murmur of lives, and every single one of them his to protect, his to lead. The responsibility was a physical weight, heavier than any crown. He felt a restless energy thrumming under his skin, a predator's itch that no amount of territory patrols could scratch. His wolf paced the confines of his mind, agitated and hungry for something he couldn't name. His beta, Elias, approached, his footsteps silent. "Alpha, the council has sent the morning ledgers and another list of suitable mates." Caden didn't even turn. "Burn the list." "Caden, these are powerful alliances. The daughter of the Silver Moon Pack is a political pawn with vacant eyes." The words were a low growl, sharper than he intended. The air thickened. He took a breath, reining in the fury. "I will not be shackled to a she-wolf whose only ambition is the title of Luna." Elias sighed, a sound of weary patience. "Your father would say, 'My father is dead.'" Caden finally turned, his golden eyes pinning his beta in place. "And my father's trust in suitable allies is what led to the Blood Creek betrayal. Have you forgotten?" The memory was a raw, jagged thing in his chest, a trusted advisor, a secret alliance with a rival pack, a bloody ambush that had cost him a dozen good wolves before he'd even truly learned how to lead. That's why he trusted no one now. He trusted his strength. He trusted his senses. But most of all, he trusted the wild, untamable instinct of the wolf inside him. And that wolf was rejecting every perfectly coiffed, politically advantageous female they paraded before him. Because of that, his council thought he was being reckless. Truth be told, he was being cautious. Without another word, he stalked past Elias. "I'm walking the village, alone." He needed air. He needed to escape the suffocating weight of duty, the ghosts of past betrayals, and the gnawing, endless restlessness. He didn't know what he was looking for, but his wolf was pulling him forward, dragging him down from his cold stone fortress and into the heart of the pack. He moved with a coiled energy, a storm waiting to break, his long strides eating up the ground. What he was searching for, he didn't know, but he would know it when he saw it. The scent of wood smoke, baking bread, and the 1,000 tiny lives of his pack filled the air, but beneath it all, he was hunting for a different scent, a different truth, something real in a world of performance and lies.
The world stopped with a scent. She had made it to the edge of the square, her arms trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She set the baskets down for just a moment to let the fire in her muscles subside. And then she smelled it. Ozone, ancient pines, and a raw, untamed power that made the hair on her arms stand on end. The casual market chatter died. The crowd parted. As if pulled by a string, her head lifted, and she saw him. Alpha Caden. He wasn't just a leader, he was a force of nature crammed into the shape of a man. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell over a brutally handsome face. But it was his eyes that stole the air from her lungs. They weren't just brown or blue, they were gold. A piercing, feral gold that seemed to see right through her rags, through her skin, and into the terrified, fluttering thing that was her soul. Before she could move, before she could force her gaze back to the dirt where it belonged, a flurry of silk and perfume cut through the space between them. Alpha Caden! Lady Seraphina's voice was pure honey, her smile a dazzling weapon. Veda and Lyra flanked her, their faces masks of sweet, simpering perfection. What an honor! My daughters and I were just on our way to deliver a pie to the elders. Caden's golden gaze flickered over them, unimpressed. Then, his eyes, those terrifying, mesmerizing eyes, snapped right back to Nerissa. The silence stretched, a taut wire of tension. With every heartbeat, she prayed for the ground to swallow her whole. He tilted his head, his focus so intense it felt like a physical touch. A low rumble started in his chest. Who is she? The question was quiet, but it cracked through the square like a whip. Lady Seraphina didn't even glance at Nerissa. Her laugh was light, dismissive. Her? Oh, she's no one, Alpha. She's just our maid. She gave Nerissa a shove with her foot, a subtle, humiliating gesture. These are my daughters, my real daughters. But then, something impossible happened. The Alpha didn't look at Veda or Lyra. In fact, he looked right past them, his stare fixed on Nerissa. He saw the smudge of dirt on her cheek, the tremor in her hands, the defiant spark she tried so hard to hide in the depths of her frightened eyes.
The moment their eyes locked, the world went silent. The political chatter, the market smells, the weight of his own crown. It all vanished. There was only her, a slip of a girl in rags, looking at him with the terror of a cornered fawn. But beneath the fear there was something else, something resilient, something pure. And his wolf, the restless, demanding beast he had lived with his entire life, rose up on its hind legs inside his soul and roared, "Mine." The word was not a thought. It was a brand, a claim, a truth so absolute it shook the foundations of his world. It made no sense. She was a servant, scared, unimportant, but his instincts, the only thing he truly trusted, screamed otherwise. Lady Seraphina's words were a distant buzzing. He heard Maid, he heard no one, and a possessive, protective fury he had never known surged through him. No one. This girl, whose scent was like wildflowers after a storm, whose eyes held a universe of unspoken strength, was the furthest thing from no one he had ever seen. The tension broke when a low, dangerous growl escaped his lips. It wasn't intentional, but it was undeniable. It silenced Seraphina's prattling, made her beautiful daughters take a step back. His gaze never left the girl. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But in a single heartbeat, the world shifted, and the only thing that mattered was the sudden, undeniable certainty that he had just found the very thing he had been hunting for his entire life. Back in the cold authority of his lodge, the world snapped back into focus, but the girl remained. Her image was a brand on the inside of his mind, smudged, terrified, and more real than anything else in his gilded cage. The restlessness he'd felt before was gone. In its place was a singular obsessive certainty that pulsed with the beat of his heart. It was a feeling so primal it scared him, because his wolf, the beast he relied on for truth, had never been this absolute. Elias followed him into the strategy room. A map of the territories sprawled across an oak table. Caden, the whispers have already started. The way you looked at that servant. Don't call her that. Caden growled, the sound ripping from his chest before he could stop it. Elias stiffened. She is a servant. She has no name, no standing. What you did out there was politically unwise. Lady Seraphina is a key ally. Her family holds the southern pass. Caden slammed his palm on the table, making the wooden map markers jump. I have had enough of politics. I have had enough of allies who smile to my face and sharpen their knives behind my back. His voice dropped, the fury turning into a low, dangerous hum. I trusted a suitable ally at Blood Creek, Elias. I listened to my counsel, and in return, I buried 12 of my pack. Because of that, he had sworn to trust only one thing, the instinct that burned in his gut. And his instinct was screaming. Her. This is different, Elias reasoned, his voice soft. This isn't about war. This is about stability. This is about truth. Caden spun to face him, his golden eyes blazing. He felt it, etched in fire, the undeniable pull toward her. It was a bond, raw and unformed, but it was there, and he would not let politics and whispers poison it before it even had a chance to breathe. In that moment, he made a decision. It was not the decision of an alpha. It was the decision of a wolf. Without another word, he strode to the door. Elias. Alpha? You will go to Lady Seraphina's home. His voice was cold iron, leaving no room for argument. You will deliver a summons. The maid, Nerissa. She will attend the mating ceremony tonight. Elias's jaw dropped. The silence in the room roared. Caden, you can't be serious. To single out a servant like that, it will be a scandal. The council will be furious. Let them be furious, Caden snarled, his hand on the door. I am the alpha, and my wolf has made its choice. With that he left, the heavy oak door slamming shut, the echo of his command sealing Nerissa's fate, and his own.
The burn of the alpha's stare followed her all the way back to the house. It was a phantom touch on her skin, a ghost in the air she breathed. Her thoughts spun as she scrubbed a soot-blackened pot in the scullery, her knuckles raw. She tried to forget it, to push the memory down into the dark, quiet place where she kept all the things that hurt. But his eyes, those impossible golden eyes, kept flashing in her mind. Who is she? The question echoed, a terrifying validation that she was, in fact, seen, and being seen was the most dangerous thing in the world. Without warning, the scullery door swung open. Lady Seraphina stood there, her face a mask of cold fury. But then, the sound of official footsteps approached, and her expression melted into one of pleasant surprise. The Alpha's beta, Elias, filled the doorway. Lady Seraphina, he said, his voice formal. I have a summons from the Alpha. Seraphina's smile was blinding. She placed a hand over her heart. Oh? For Veda or Lyra? They were so hoping to catch his eye. Nerissa shrank back, trying to merge with the damp stone walls. She knew what this was, a cruel joke, a way to torment her further. Elias's gaze flickered past the preening stepsisters and landed, impossibly, on Nerissa. He cleared his throat. The summons is for the girl, Nerissa. The world tilted. The scrubbing brush fell from her numb fingers with a clatter. Serafina's smile froze, cracking at the edges. I beg your pardon? Serafina stammered. Alpha's orders, Elias said, his tone leaving no room for debate. She is to attend the mating ceremony tonight. He didn't wait for a reply. He simply nodded and was gone. For a full minute, the kitchen was utterly silent. Nerissa's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might break free. This had to be a mistake. A nightmare. Then Serafina turned. The pleasant mask was gone, revealing the monster beneath. Her voice was a venomous whisper. What did you do? Nothing, I swear it. Nerissa's voice trembled. Don't lie to me, you little witch. Serafina advanced on her, her eyes glittering with malice. Did you use some charm? Some back alley magic? The last girl who got ideas above her station? Well, let's just say she left this village with nothing but the rags on her back. The threat hung in the air thick and suffocating. That night, as the moon rose high and the sounds of the ceremony began to drift from the village center, Serafina came to her. She was holding a beautiful silk gown, the color of twilight. Nerissa stared, confused. You didn't think I'd let you go in those rags, did you? Serafina said, her voice unnervingly sweet. Go to your room. I'll bring this up to you. A tiny, foolish flicker of hope ignited in Nerissa's chest. But then, as she stepped into the cold, dark attic room that served as her prison, Serafina's smile turned cruel. Instead of giving her the dress, she shoved Nerissa inside. The heavy door slammed shut. The sound of the key turning in the lock was the loudest sound Nerissa had ever heard. And she knew, in the suffocating darkness, that she had been a fool to ever hope at all.
The great hall was a theater of lies. The air was thick with expensive perfumes, the murmur of calculated gossip, and the cloying scent of political ambition. He sat on the Alpha's throne, a carved monstrosity of oak and wolf pelts, and felt like a prisoner. He scanned the crowd, a sea of silks and jewels, of powerful wolves and their preening mates. He was looking for one face, one pair of terrified, resilient eyes, and she was not there. The space between them burned, an invisible tether pulling taut across the village. With every heartbeat, his wolf grew more agitated, pacing the cage of his ribs, a low growl building in its throat. She's not coming, Elias murmured beside him, his face grim. You've been made a fool of, Caden. No, Caden breathed, his gaze locking on Lady Serafina, who was holding court near the fire pit, her daughters flanking her like polished statues. She looked too pleased, too triumphant. In the span of a breath, his suspicion hardened into certainty. He rose from the throne. As if the world narrowed, the hall fell silent, all eyes turning to him. He moved through the crowd, a predator parting a herd, his steps silent and deliberate. He stopped before Serafina. My lady, he said, his voice dangerously soft. I find myself missing one of my guests. Serafina feigned a look of innocent confusion. Oh? Who could that be, Alpha? The girl, Nerissa. When her name left his lips, he saw it, a flicker of panic in her eyes before it was expertly masked. She waved a dismissive hand, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Ah, the poor dear. She was taken quite ill this evening. A terrible fever. She said she has no stomach for such grand ceremonies anyway. It was a perfect lie, plausible, considerate, and every instinct in his body screamed that it was a trap. The memory of Blood Creek, of a traitor's smooth lies, flooded his senses. Deep down he knew the truth. Her heart was beating just a little too fast. His wolf pressed forward, and he let it happen. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that only she could hear. You know, for someone so terribly ill, I imagine a bit of fresh air would do her good. Before the words left her lips, before she could craft another lie, he straightened up, his voice ringing through the silent hall, a command as sharp and final as a headsman's axe. My guards will fetch her. The air thickened, a collective gasp rippled through the pack. Bring her to me, now. The heavy doors of the hall boomed open as two of his most loyal wolves marched out into the night. The scandal had begun, and Caden found that he did not give a damn. He would have his mate.
The lock on her attic door didn't turn. It splintered. Without warning, the heavy wood shuddered, a crack spiderwebbing across the grain before the door exploded inward, torn from its hinges. Two massive wolves, the Alpha's guards, filled the doorway, their faces grim and set like stone. Before she could move, before she could even scream, rough hands seized her arms, hauling her from the dusty floor. Her breath caught in a strangled gasp. This wasn't a rescue. This was an abduction. They dragged her through the house, a blur of familiar halls now seen through a haze of terror. Lady Seraphina stood at the bottom of the stairs, a triumphant, venomous smirk on her perfect face. "This is what you get," her eyes screamed. "This is what happens to maids who dream." Then she was outside, the cold night air a shock against her thin, torn dress. The sounds of the ceremony, which had been a distant murmur, became a deafening roar. Music, laughter, and the smell. Oh, the smell of roasting meats and spiced wine and the heady perfume of 100 she-wolves made her stomach clench with dread. She was a dirty stray being dragged into a royal court. As they entered the great hall, a wave of silence washed over the crowd, followed by a ripple of cruel, mocking laughter. Her stepsisters were at the forefront, their faces alight with malicious glee. The moment was a nightmare etched in firelight. 100 pairs of eyes all on her, judging her, despising her. In that moment, her one and only goal was to disappear, to simply cease to exist. But then, the guards shoved her forward, and she stumbled, falling to the cold stone floor at the foot of the Alpha's throne. The laughter grew louder. As if pulled by a string, her gaze lifted from the floor, past the jeering faces, and landed on him. Alpha Caden. He was descending the steps, his face a thundercloud, his golden eyes blazing with an emotion she couldn't name. The air thickened, and the world seemed to narrow until it was only the two of them. She didn't know what scared her more, the fury in his eyes or the terrifying, impossible way he looked at her as if she were the only person in the room.
The sight of her broke something inside him. When the doors to the hall had boomed open, he had expected a reluctant girl, perhaps a bit disheveled. Instead, he saw his mate being dragged like a prisoner of war. Her dress was torn, her cheek was smudged with dirt, and her eyes, those resilient, beautiful eyes, were wide with a terror that clawed at his soul. And then they threw her to the floor. Laughter erupted. His pack was laughing at her, at his mate. A growl, black and furious and full of death, ripped from his throat. It wasn't a sound a man made. It was the sound of a predator, a promise of violence that silenced the hall in a single, terrified heartbeat. The laughter died, strangled in 100 throats. His vision narrowed, the edges turning red. All he could see was her, small and broken on the stone floor, and the smirking faces of those who had put her there. What followed was not a choice. It was an inevitability. Her body moved on instinct, his wolf surging forward, taking complete control. He stalked down the steps, each movement a coiled spring of rage. He ignored Seraphina's suddenly panicked expression. He ignored the shocked stares of his council. He walked until he stood over Nerissa, his shadow falling across her trembling form. He reached down, his hand gentle as he helped her to her feet, pulling her to stand before him. She flinched, expecting a blow. The realization that she expected pain from him sent another wave of fury through him. He had to end this. Now. Because any moment he let this stand was a moment he was failing her, failing his wolf, failing the bond that was a living fire in his veins. The moment their eyes locked, he let his own gaze soften for just a heartbeat, a silent promise. "I will protect you." Then he turned his head, his golden eyes sweeping across the silent, watching pack. He let the full, untamed power of his alpha nature fill the hall, a crushing pressure that made the weaker wolves lower their heads in submission. He drew Nerissa closer, his arm wrapping around her waist, a possessive, definitive claim. Her scent, Wildflowers and rain and a strength she didn't even know she possessed filled his senses, calming the beast while fueling the man. He opened his mouth, and the word that came out was not spoken. It was a howl, a roar, a declaration that shook the very rafters of the hall and settled deep in the bones of every wolf present. Mine!
His voice. It wasn't just a sound. It was a physical force. It slammed into her, a wave of heat and power and raw possession that vibrated through her bones and silenced the frantic beating of her heart. Mine. The word echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the hall. It settled on her skin like a warm cloak, chasing away the chill of her humiliation. Something inside her shifted, a strange, dormant part of her soul stirring to life, answering his call. Before she could process it, before anyone could react, he was moving. He scooped her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. Her head fell against his chest, and she was surrounded by him. His scent, his strength, the steady, thunderous beat of his heart against her ear. He didn't say another word. He simply turned and carried her from the great hall, leaving behind a storm of scandal and shock. He took her to his private chambers. The room was bigger than her entire house, dominated by a massive stone fireplace where a warm, crackling fire blazed. Furs were draped over heavy wooden chairs, and the air smelled of old leather, wood smoke, and him. He set her down gently on a plush rug in front of the fire, his movements now surprisingly tender. The space between them burned. Her breath caught as he knelt before her, a wet cloth in his hand. He didn't speak. He just began to clean the dirt from her cheek, his touch so careful, so gentle. It was her undoing. A single tear escaped her eye and traced a path through the grime. No one had touched her with kindness in years. Why? Her voice was a trembling whisper, barely audible over the crackle of the fire. He paused, his golden eyes searching hers. The inferno of rage she'd seen in the hall was gone, replaced by something deeper, something that looked almost like pain. Because lies have cost me everything before, he murmured, his voice a low rumble. I will not let them cost me you. He didn't explain what he meant, leaving the words to hang in the air between them, a promise and a mystery all at once. What's worse, she realized he wasn't just angry for her. He was angry at the deception itself, for reasons that clearly ran deeper than just tonight. Without thinking, she reached out, her fingers hesitantly touching the back of his hand. His skin was warm, alive. His entire body went rigid at her touch, a shudder running through him. As the silence stretched, she saw it. The alpha, the monster from the hall, was gone. In his place was a man, a wolf, who looked as lost and overwhelmed as she felt. He stood abruptly, putting space between them. You will be safe here, he said, his voice once again the formal tone of an alpha. No one will harm you. He turned and left, closing the heavy door behind him with a quiet click. And Nerissa was left alone, in the heart of the monster's den, feeling, for the first time in a decade, strangely and terrifyingly safe. Come morning, Nerissa awoke in a bed softer than a cloud, tangled in sheets that smelled faintly of pine and Caden. For a single, dizzying heartbeat, she allowed herself to believe she was safe. That the warmth of the fire from the night before was a promise. The world, however, had other plans. She found a simple, clean dress laid out for her, a soft gray wool that was 100 times finer than anything she had ever owned. Her heart skipped. Maybe this was real. But then, she opened the door to his chambers and stepped out. The silence that greeted her was louder than any shout. The servants in the hall, who had once ignored her, now stopped their work to stare, their eyes a mixture of fear and contempt. As she walked towards the great hall, 2 noble she-wolves passed her. They didn't even bother to lower their voices. I heard she bewitched him, one whispered, her voice like sandpaper. Used some kind of forbidden charm. It's the only explanation. It's a disgrace, the other agreed. An alpha of his bloodline. Bound to that. That. The word struck Nerissa like a physical blow. Her old life was a cage of insults, but this new one was a gilded fishbowl where everyone could see her and everyone could judge. As a result, she spent the day trying to make herself small, exploring the vast, empty corridors of the lodge. She found a library filled with more books than she had ever seen, their leather spines a silent comfort. But even there, she felt the weight of 100 unseen eyes. Later that afternoon, she tried to speak to Caden. She found him in his strategy room, leaning over a map, his face a mask of grim concentration. "Alpha," she began, her voice trembling. He looked up, and for a second, the harsh lines of his face softened. But then his eyes hardened again, becoming the eyes of a leader, not a mate. "What is it?" They're whispering," she stammered, feeling foolish. "The pack. They say terrible things." He sighed, a sound of pure frustration, and ran a hand through his dark hair. "Let them whisper. Their words are air. I am dealing with a territorial dispute to the east and a council that is on the verge of open revolt because of last night. I don't have time for gossip." His dismissal was not cruel, but it was absolute. It told her in no uncertain terms that she was on her own with this. He was her protector from physical threats, but not from this slow, creeping poison of words. Her newfound safety felt fragile, brittle. As she turned to leave, her heart aching, she nearly collided with her stepsister, Veda, who was delivering a tray of food. Veda's smile was pure venom. She leaned in close, her voice a sickly sweet whisper. "Enjoy it while it lasts, Maid," she hissed. "He'll find out what you really are soon enough, and then he'll throw you back in the dirt where you belong."
Meanwhile, the lodge was a hornet's nest, and Caden was standing in the middle of it. His council of elders, 6 grim-faced wolves with silver in their muzzles, had been in his strategy room for an hour, their disapproval a suffocating presence. "You have made a mockery of the mating ceremony," Elder Thane boomed, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "You have shamed every noble-born she-wolf and elevated a nameless servant girl. The pack is unsettled." "The pack will settle," Caden countered, his voice a low growl. "They will follow their alpha." "They will follow a strong alpha," Thane shot back, "not one ruled by impulse." His wolf snarled at the insult, but Caden held it back. He knew they were right, to a point. He had broken every tradition, but then, his decision to claim Nerissa hadn't been an impulse. It had been a certainty, a truth his soul recognized even if his mind couldn't explain it. As he was about to dismiss them, a guard announced a visitor, Lady Seraphina. He agreed to see her, a knot of suspicion tightening in his gut. She entered not with anger, but with a performance of heartbreaking concern. Her eyes were wide with feigned worry. "Alpha," she began, her voice trembling just so. "Forgive my intrusion. I come as a loyal servant of this pack. I am worried for you." "Worried?" he asked, his voice flat. "You have been under such strain, and this girl, Nerissa." She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself to deliver terrible news. "My daughter, Lyra, she saw something. She didn't want to say anything. She was afraid. But her loyalty to you is absolute." The air thickened. Caden waited, his body still, his senses on high alert. "Lyra saw Nerissa this morning," Seraphina said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "At the edge of the woods. She was meeting someone, a wolf from the Crimson Fang pack. The Crimson Fangs were their most bitter rivals." A growl rumbled in his chest, a primal automatic rejection of her words. "Liar." "She is loyal to me," Caden stated, the words a shield. "Of course," Seraphina agreed quickly, too quickly. "But, Alpha, you know how these things work. A poor girl, suddenly given riches and a title. Perhaps they threatened her, used her. You remember what happened at Blood Creek, how a trusted face was used to hide a traitor's plot. And there it was. The trigger. The one word that could bypass his wolf's instinct and sink a poisoned blade directly into his heart. Betrayal. The memory of his dead packmates, of the smooth-tongued advisor who had sold them out, rose like bile in his throat. His wolf was screaming that Serafina was lying, but his human mind, the scarred, paranoid alpha, latched onto the terrible, sickening possibility. A seed of doubt, cold and hard, took root in the fertile ground of his oldest wound. He kept his face an unreadable mask of stone. "Thank you for your loyalty, my lady," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "I will look into this." She left, a flicker of triumph in her eyes that she couldn't quite hide. And Caden was left alone, the silence of the room roaring in his ears. The battle was no longer outside his walls. It was now inside his own head.
That night, she waited for him by the fire. She had brushed her hair until it shone, and the soft gray dress made her feel almost beautiful. A foolish, fluttering hope beat in her chest. Maybe he would talk to her. Maybe he would understand. But then, the door opened, and a different man walked in. It was Caden, but it wasn't. The warmth was gone, replaced by a chilling distance. He moved with the same predatory grace, but his eyes, when they met hers, held a new, sharp glint of suspicion. The space between them, which had crackled with heat the night before, now felt like a frozen wasteland. Her breath caught. He said nothing, simply walking to a table and pouring himself a drink. Her heart ached with a sudden sharp pain. "Caden?" she whispered, her voice small. He finally turned to look at her, his expression closed off. "I was busy today," he said, his voice flat. "I know," she replied softly. I missed you." The simple, honest words seemed to make him flinch. He took a long drink, his knuckles white around the glass. In the quiet that followed, he walked towards her, stopping just out of arm's reach. His scent filled her senses, but it brought no comfort, only tension. "Tell me something, Nerissa," he said, his voice deceptively casual. "Where were you this afternoon?" The question was a trap, and she had no idea how she'd walked into it. Her thoughts spun. Had he heard the gossip? Was he testing her? I was in the library," she answered, the simple truth suddenly feeling like the flimsiest lie she had ever told. "And I walked through the gardens for a little while." He just stared at her, his golden eyes unblinking, searching for something she couldn't see. He didn't accuse her. He didn't yell. He did something far worse. He looked at her as if she were a stranger, a puzzle he was trying to solve. Her voice trembled as she asked, "What is it? What's wrong?" Without another word, he turned his back on her. "I'm tired," he said, the words a dismissal as sharp as any blade. "Get some rest." He walked to a separate door she hadn't noticed before and disappeared into an adjoining room, the quiet click of the closing door echoing the sound of the first, terrible crack forming in the heart of their fragile bond.
Sleep did not come. Instead, Caden spent the night pacing the confines of his private strategy room, a caged wolf rattling the bars of his own mind. The seed of doubt Lady Serafina had planted had taken root, its poisonous vines wrapping around his heart, choking the very air from his lungs. His wolf snarled in the back of his mind, a constant furious protest. She is ours. She is true. But the ghost of Blood Creek was stronger. It whispered of smiles that hid daggers, of loyalty that was a mask for treason. He could not live like this, torn between the instinct that felt as true as his own heartbeat and the paranoia that had kept him alive for years. He needed proof. He needed to either kill this doubt or confirm it. Because of that, his decision felt less like a choice and more like a surrender to the torment. Come morning, he summoned his two most trusted guards, the same two who had pulled Nerissa from her prison. He met them not in the hall but in the shadow of the armory, his voice a low, hard command. Lady Seraphina claims the girl was meeting a crimson fang wolf at the edge of the woods, he stated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. I want you to go there, quietly, search the area. I want to know if her story holds any truth. He hated himself for giving the order, for giving Seraphina's poison that much power. Yet he was more terrified of being a fool again. He was the alpha. He could not afford to be played, not when the stakes were the safety of his entire pack. Moments later, they were gone, and he was left with the hollow echo of his own mistrust. He avoided Nerissa all day. He saw her from a distance, a flash of gray wool in the library, a lonely figure in the gardens. Each glimpse was a fresh stab of pain. A part of him wanted to run to her, to hold her and let her warmth burn away the cold poison inside him. But the other part, the scarred and bitter alpha, held him back. It whispered, "Wait for the proof." Eventually his guards returned. Their faces were grim. One of them, Marcus, held a small leather pouch. He didn't have to speak. Caden knew. "We found these, Alpha," Marcus said, his voice heavy with reluctance. He emptied the pouch onto a table. The world tilted. Time stood still. There, on the cold, unforgiving wood, lay a scrap of gray fabric, torn from the very dress Nerissa was wearing right now, and next to it, a small, elegant bottle of rosewater perfume, the one he had given her just 2 nights ago as a small, clumsy gesture of welcome. The scent of it, faint but undeniable, rose in the air, a sweet, suffocating betrayal. This was not rumor. This was not gossip. This was evidence, cold, hard, and undeniable. His wolf howled in agony, a sound of pure denial, but Caden silenced it. The proof was right in front of him, and it screamed a truth he could no longer ignore.
The cold silence between them stretched into a second day, a thin, sharp wire of tension that vibrated with every unspoken word, with every stolen glance. He was a ghost in his own lodge, a thundercloud on the edge of her vision. The hope she had foolishly clung to had withered and died, replaced by a familiar, aching loneliness. She felt it, etched in fire. The sting of his rejection was a physical pain, worse than any of her stepmother's slaps. That night, she sat by the fire, not daring to hope for his company. She just watched the flames dance, their warmth a poor substitute for the heat she'd felt in his presence. Her thoughts spun, a dizzying carousel of confusion and hurt. What had she done wrong? Why had he turned away from her? The door to his chambers opened, and her heart gave a painful leap. He was here. But the man who entered was not her mate. He was an executioner. His face was carved from ice, his golden eyes chips of frozen fury. In his hand, he held a scrap of gray fabric and a small glass bottle. Her breath caught. Without a word, he strode to the table and threw them down. The clatter of the bottle against the wood was like a gunshot in the silent room. "Explain this," he commanded, his voice a low, lethal thing that held no warmth, no love, only judgment. Nerissa stared at the items, her mind a complete blank. It was a piece of her dress, and the perfume bottle he had given her. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with honest confusion. I don't understand." "Don't you?" he snarled, taking a step closer. "My guards found these at the edge of our territory, right where the Crimson Fangs hunt, right where you were seen meeting one of them." The accusation slammed into her. A meeting? A rival pack? It made no sense. "No!" she cried, shaking her head. I wouldn't." "Then how did these get there?" he demanded, his voice rising, cracking with a pain he couldn't hide. "Did they fall from your pocket when you were betraying me? When you were selling my pack's secrets to our enemies?" Each word was a nail in her heart. He truly believed it. He thought she was a traitor. The beautiful, fragile thing that had started to grow between them shattered into a million pieces. Her old misbelief, the one she had fought against for 2 days, came roaring back with a vengeance. "Of course he doesn't believe you. You're just the maid. You're worthless. You're nothing. Tears streamed down her face, hot and silent. Her voice was a broken whisper. I didn't do this. Caden, please. You have to believe me. But he just stared at her, his face a mask of heartbreak and fury. He looked at her, and she knew deep in her soul that he did not see his mate. He saw a liar. He saw the ghost of Blood Creek. I want to believe you, he choked out, the words raw with anguish. My wolf, it screams for you. He took a ragged breath. But I have seen this before. I have trusted a pretty face and buried my pack for it. I will not make that mistake again. Before she could speak again, he turned his back on her, the gesture of final, brutal rejection. Stay here. Do not leave this room. And with that, he was gone, leaving her alone with the pieces of her shattered heart and the undeniable proof of a crime she did not commit.
He stumbled from the room, his vision blurred, his chest a hollow cavern of pain. He had needed to see her face, to hear her deny it. And she had. But the evidence was too strong. He was a fool, a blind, pathetic fool, ruled by an instinct that had led him straight into another traitor's arms. As fire bloomed beneath his skin, he felt the rage building, a desperate need to lash out, to destroy something, anything, to make the pain stop. He was in the main hall, pacing like a caged animal when she appeared. Lady Seraphina. She moved from the shadows as if summoned, her face a perfect portrait of grave concern. Alpha, she said, her voice soft and full of pity. You look tormented. She denied it. He bit out, the words tasting like poison. Of course she did, Seraphina said soothingly, placing a delicate hand on his arm. He didn't shrug it off, he was too numb. These creatures are cunning, Alpha. They know how to weep and plead. But actions tell the real story. She paused, letting the silence hang between them. Then she delivered the final killing blow. They want to meet with her again, she whispered, her eyes wide. The Crimson Fangs. My source tells me they are growing impatient. They want the information she promised them. They will be in the old clearing, south of the river, tonight. The air thickened, becoming heavy, hard to breathe. This was it. The final act. How do you know this? He demanded, his voice hoarse. I have my ways, she said vaguely. I do what I must to protect my pack, to protect my Alpha. She looked up at him, her expression one of utter devotion. And in his broken, paranoid state, he almost believed it. She offered him a way out of this hell of uncertainty, a way to know, once and for all. Let me help you, she offered, her voice a silken trap. We can set a watch. You can see it for yourself. You can catch her in the act, and then your heart can finally be free of her poison. He looked at her, at this perfect, concerned, loyal she-wolf, and then thought of Nerissa's tear-streaked face. His wolf was whimpering in the back of his mind, a wounded, dying thing. But the Alpha, the leader who had been betrayed before, made the final choice. He would sacrifice the hope of his heart for the certainty his mind demanded. Fine, he said, the word a death sentence. Set the watch. I will be there. With his scent in the air, a mixture of rage and utter despair, he sealed the pact. He had just agreed to conspire with the true enemy to lay a trap for his own innocent mate. And in doing so, he had walked past the point of no return.
Her world had shrunk to the four walls of the Alpha's chambers. The fire in the hearth had burned down to glowing embers, offering little warmth against the chill that had settled deep in her bones. It was a coldness that came not from the night air, but from the frozen wasteland in Caden's eyes. She sat on the edge of the bed, numb, replaying his accusation over and over. I will not make that mistake again. Which meant, to him, she was a mistake. A ghost of some past pain she couldn't possibly understand. Without warning, the chamber door creaked open. It wasn't Caden. It was a young servant girl named Elspeth, her eyes wide with panic. My lady, she whispered, twisting the edge of her apron. Forgive me. I didn't know who else to go to. Nerissa looked up, her own misery momentarily forgotten. What is it? What's wrong? It's Tom, the girl choked out, her voice thick with tears. The kitchen boy. He was in a training exercise, a terrible accident with one of the older wolves. His leg is broken, and he's bleeding badly. He's down by the river clearing, scared to move. She took a ragged breath. He's terrified of the pack healers, but he trusts you. He said you were always kind to him. He's asking for you. A kitchen boy. Tom. Nerissa remembered him. A lanky, shy boy who always looked hungry. She'd slipped him extra bread a few times. That was all. And now he was hurt. And he was asking for her. Her chest ached. In a world where she felt utterly worthless, someone needed her. Someone thought she was kind. Her own heartbreak didn't matter. Her own fear didn't matter. All that mattered was a scared, injured boy in the woods. As if her body moved on instinct, she stood up. Take me to him. But the Alpha, Elspeth began, her eyes darting towards the door. He said you weren't to leave. And we will let a boy bleed in the forest because of it, Nerissa asked, a flicker of her old fire returning. Her own pain had made her passive, but the thought of another's suffering was a call to action she couldn't ignore. Without thinking, she followed the girl from the room, slipping out a side door and into the cold, oppressive darkness of the night. The trees of the forest loomed ahead, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for her. While the forest held its breath, she walked on, a singular, desperate goal in her heart. To help someone. To do one good thing in a world that had turned so horribly wrong.
The forest was a place of shadows and secrets, and tonight, he was one of them. He stood concealed behind the massive trunk of an ancient oak, the rough bark digging into his back. He felt like a coward, a spy, a monster laying a trap for the one person his soul recognized as its own. With every heartbeat, his wolf clawed at the inside of his skull, begging him to stop this, to trust the bond, to go to her. But the man, the Alpha who had buried his own packmates, forced it down. He had to see. He had to know. He'd been waiting for what felt like an eternity when he heard a twig snap. He tensed, his senses screaming. Two figures emerged into the moonlit clearing. The Crimson Fang wolves, hulking and dangerous. They took up positions, their posture casual, familiar, as if they were waiting for an old friend. Moments later, a second sound, lighter footsteps, and then she appeared. Nerissa. His breath caught. A wild, treacherous hope surged through him. She looked worried, frightened, not like a conspirator arriving for a clandestine meeting. She was scanning the clearing, her eyes wide. Maybe Serafina was wrong. Maybe this was all a terrible. But then, the two Crimson Fang wolves stepped out from the shadows, and the hope inside him died a swift, brutal death. "You're late," one of them grunted, his voice a low rumble. It was the perfect opening line for a spy movie. The other one crossed his thick arms. "The Alpha is growing suspicious. Did you bring the information?" Caden's world fractured. It was happening. It was all true. He was watching his own betrayal play out in real time. His wolf let out a silent, agonized howl in the cage of his mind, a sound of pure heartbreak. He felt the cold, familiar sting of being a fool, of trusting when he should have known better. He had let a pretty face and a primal instinct blind him. Again. He gripped the hilt of the dagger at his belt, the cold leather grounding him in the terrible, final certainty. His lowest point wasn't losing his pack at Blood Creek. It was this. It was standing in the shadows, watching his own mate prove herself to be a traitor. He was about to step out to let his rage and his justice fall upon them all, but he stopped. He wanted to hear her answer. He wanted to hear the final lie from her own lips.
She entered the clearing, her eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of an injured boy. "Tom?" she called out softly. "Elspeth said you were here." Instead of an answer, two hulking figures detached themselves from the darkness. They were not her pack. Their scent was wrong. Sharp, aggressive, like burnt iron and wet dog. The red wolf crest of the Crimson Fangs was embroidered on their leather tunics. Terror, cold and absolute, stole her breath. This was a trap. "You're late," one of them said. "Did you bring the information?" the other demanded. Information? What were they talking about? Her mind raced, a frantic, panicked scramble for an explanation that wasn't there. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Her eyes darted around the clearing, searching for an escape, for any sign of Elspeth, for anything that made sense. And then she saw him. As if summoned by her terror, Caden stepped out from behind a great oak tree. He wasn't rushing to her rescue. He wasn't charging to her defense. He was just watching. And the look on his face, it was the single most devastating thing she had ever seen. It was a mask of cold, settled contempt, of utter and complete belief in her guilt. In that single heartbeat, the world shifted. The trap wasn't just these two wolves. The trap was for him. To prove to him that she was a traitor. And he had not only watched it happen, he had let it happen. He believed it. The betrayal was so absolute, so profound, it burned away everything else. Her fear, her confusion, her heartbreak. All of it was incinerated in a sudden, clarifying blaze of despair. She was alone. She had nothing. No one. Her deepest, most secret fear, that she was worthless, unlovable, and utterly disposable, was staring back at her from the golden eyes of her own mate. The silence roared. The space between them, a battlefield of lies and broken trust, shimmered with unspoken pain. She had nothing left to lose. So she stopped trying to survive. She stopped trying to be understood. She simply stood, straight and tall, and looked past the two brutes in front of her, her gaze locking with Caden's. Her voice, when it came, did not tremble. It did not plead. It was the calm, clear sound of a heart breaking. "I would rather die," she said, her words a vow spoken into the cold, listening night, "than betray you." The words hung in the air, a truth spoken from the absolute bottom of her world. It was not the answer he was expecting. It wasn't an excuse or a lie. It was a declaration. And in the stunned, terrible silence that followed, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not belief. Not yet. But something far more dangerous. Doubt.
As if her words were a physical key, they unlocked the cage in his mind. "I would rather die than betray you." The sentence, spoken with the calm finality of a dying breath, did not ring with deception. It rang with a truth so profound, it shattered the icy certainty that had encased his heart. The world tilted on its axis. His wolf, which had been whimpering in a wounded heap, rose with a furious roar, no longer fighting against his paranoia, but against him. It screamed a single undeniable truth. "You are the fool." In the echo of her voice, his gaze snapped from Nerissa's pale, resolute face to one of his own guards, Marcus, the one who had brought him the proof. The guard flinched, his eyes wide with a terror that had nothing to do with the Crimson Fangs. Caden didn't move. He didn't shout. He let the full, crushing weight of his alpha power descend upon the clearing. The air grew heavy, thick with menace. "Marcus," he said, his voice a low, deadly whisper that cut through the night. "You brought me the evidence." It wasn't a question. The guard trembled, sweat beading on his brow. "Alpha, You looked me in the eye," Caden continued, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. "And you handed me the proof of her betrayal." The space between them crackled. "Tell me again where you found it." Marcus's composure broke. It shattered into 1,000 pieces of panicked, sputtering fear. She made me do it," he cried, pointing a trembling finger not at Nerissa, but towards the edge of the woods where Lady Seraphina was concealed. "Lady Seraphina, she paid me. She said you were being bewitched, that I would be a hero to the pack, the fabric, the bottle. She gave them to me. It was all her. What followed was a roar of pure, undiluted agony and rage. It was the sound of a soul being ripped in two, the fury at being so masterfully manipulated, and the soul-crushing guilt of what he had done to Nerissa. He had tormented his own mate. He had believed the lies of a snake over the silent song of their bond. He turned, his eyes finding Serafina's shadow in the trees, a snarl ripping from his throat. But then, the world exploded. Without warning, the Crimson Fang wolves, seeing their conspiracy had unraveled, chose violence. They lunged, not just at him, but at Nerissa, their true target. The battle had begun.
The confession, the Alpha's roar of pain, it was all a chaotic blur. One moment, the truth was unraveling in a torrent of panicked words. The next, the world was a whirlwind of claws and snarls. Caden moved like a vengeful god, a blur of shadow and fury intercepting the two wolves before they could reach her. He fought with a savagery that was terrifying and beautiful, his movements a deadly dance. But he was outnumbered. While he was engaged with one wolf, another broke free, circling around him with predatory cunning. Nerissa's heart leaped into her throat. She saw the opening. She saw the rival wolf gather its muscles, preparing to lunge for Caden's exposed back. Time stood still. The cold terror that had frozen her for days was suddenly incinerated by a blast of white-hot protective rage. It was an inferno in her veins, a feeling more powerful than any fear she had ever known. He was going to die. Her mate, the one who had seen her, the one who had claimed her, the one whose broken heart she had heard in that single, agonized roar, was about to be killed. And she would not let it happen. As if the forest watched, a power she never knew she possessed erupted from the core of her being. It was not a choice. It was a command from a part of her soul older than memory. A blinding silver light engulfed her, warm and absolute. Her bones shifted, her skin stretched, not with pain, but with a feeling of profound, exhilarating release. It felt like coming home. She felt the world sharpen. The scent of pine and blood and her mate's fury filled her new senses. The sound of the wind in the leaves was a symphony. Her wolf pressed forward and she let it happen. The scream that tore from her throat was not human. It was the roar of a she-wolf, a sound of pure, untamed power that challenged the Alpha's own.
He felt the death blow coming. He'd overextended, leaving himself open for a split second, and he knew it was a fatal mistake. He braced for the tearing agony of claws in his back, but it never came. Instead, a roar, a powerful, feminine roar he had never heard but recognized in his very soul, shattered the night. He spun around, his own opponent momentarily forgotten, and his breath left him in a single, ragged rush. The girl in rags was gone. In her place stood a wolf. She was magnificent, a creature of moonlight and living silver, her fur gleaming as if spun from starlight. She was leaner than him, built for speed and grace, but she crackled with an untamed power that sent a jolt of pure awe through him. Her eyes, they were the same eyes, Nerissa's eyes, resilient, fierce. And right now they were fixed on the wolf who had dared to threaten him. As the bond pulsed between them, no longer a one-sided pull but a blazing, two-way bridge, he understood. This was her, the true her, not a maid, not a victim, a queen. The Crimson Fang wolf, stunned by her sudden appearance, hesitated for a fatal second. It was all she needed. She lunged, a silver blur of righteous fury, her attack a perfect instinctive counter to his own brute strength. As if they had trained together for 1,000 years, they fell into a deadly rhythm. They needed no words. He would charge, breaking their formation, and she would flank, her speed a weapon he could have only dreamed of. He was the hammer, she was the blade. He felt her through the bond, her rage, her focus, her fierce, unwavering love, and he sent his own back to her, a promise of devotion forged in the heart of battle. When the last Crimson Fang wolf fell, they stood together in the center of the clearing, panting, their fur matted with dirt and blood. The forest was silent again, a witness to the carnage and the transformation. She turned her magnificent silver head, and her eyes, Nerissa's eyes, locked with his. In the quiet that followed, the war outside was over, and the war within him was finally truly done. He had found his mate, not in the hall, not on a throne, but here, in the blood and the mud. He had found his Luna.
The world came back in a rush of sensation. The coppery tang of blood in the air, the rough texture of the earth beneath her paws, the scent of Caden, a heady mix of pine, ozone, and profound relief. Her new wolf body hummed with a strange, exhilarating energy, an exhaustion so deep it felt like peace. As the silence settled, broken only by their ragged panting, she looked at the carnage around them, at the fallen enemies, and felt no fear. Only a grim, quiet finality. Her soul answered a silent call from his. He took a step towards her, his own massive form radiating a warmth that had nothing to do with the heat of battle. Before either could speak in the language of wolves, she felt a pull, a gentle unwinding in her bones. A soft silver light enveloped her again, not with the explosive force of before, but with the tenderness of a sunrise. Her form shifted, her bones retracting, her world rising as she stood once more on 2 feet. She felt vulnerable, naked, not because of her torn dress, but because her very soul felt laid bare. He was there in an instant, shrugging off his own leather tunic and wrapping it around her shoulders before she could even shiver. His scent, his warmth surrounded her. But then a gasp from the edge of the woods shattered the moment. Lady Seraphina stood there, her face a mask of disbelief and horror, flanked by her 2 trembling daughters. Behind them, drawn by the sounds of the fight, the pack was beginning to gather, their faces a mixture of confusion and awe. Seraphina's eyes darted from the dead crimson fangs to Nerissa, her mind clearly racing, searching for one last lie to spin. She's a monster!" she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger. "A wild beast! She lured them here! I saw it!" Nerissa looked at the woman who had tormented her for a decade. The fear she had always felt was gone. In its place was a cold, clear strength. She took a step forward, Caden's tunic a comforting weight on her shoulders. "No more lies, Seraphina," Nerissa said, her voice quiet, yet it carried across the clearing with an authority that stunned even herself. "Your poison has run its course." "You are nothing but a maid," Veda spat, her voice shrill with panic. Nerissa met her stepsister's gaze, and for the first time she saw not a tormentor, but a pathetic, frightened girl. A sad smile touched her lips. "I was," she said softly. "But you were so busy looking at the dirt on my dress, you never saw the wolf underneath." And as Caden moved to stand beside her, a united wall of power, she saw the truth dawn in Seraphina's eyes. The game was over. She had lost.
As the pack gathered, a silent, watching circle, he felt their confusion, their shock. They saw the dead rivals. They saw their alpha, bloodied but standing. And they saw the servant girl, wrapped in his tunic, looking not like a victim, but like a victor. More importantly, he knew this was the moment that would define his rule. He could not let a single shred of doubt remain. He stepped forward, his voice a low, commanding rumble that demanded their absolute attention. "You have been deceived," he boomed, his gaze sweeping over his pack. "For days I have been fed poison, whispers of betrayal, of forbidden charms, of a mate unworthy of her alpha." He turned and pointed a single damning finger at Lady Seraphina. "The source of that poison stands before you." A shocked gasp rippled through the crowd. "She did not use charms. She used courage," he declared, his voice ringing with a fierce pride that was a balm on his own guilty soul. "She did not offer secrets. She offered loyalty. And when our enemies came for my life, she did not bring us weakness. She brought us a strength we had forgotten." Seraphina fell to her knees, her act of contrition pathetic and transparent. "Alpha, please. I was misled. I only ever wanted what was best for the pack." "Silence," He roared, the sound echoing through the trees. He walked to her, his shadow falling over her, a final, inescapable judgment. You used my past to poison my present. You conspired with our enemies, and you tried to destroy an innocent she-wolf, who is more noble in her little finger than you are in your entire bloodline. He looked at her and at her cowering daughters and felt nothing but cold finality. Death is too quick a mercy for traitors like you. The tension broke as he delivered his sentence. You will be stripped of your name, your status, your very identity. From this day forward, you are packless. Omegas. You will leave our territory by sunrise and never return. If you are ever seen here again, my wolves will tear you apart. He turned his back on them, a final, absolute dismissal. He saw Marcus, the guard, being led away in chains. The lies had been banished. The traitors had been judged. But the justice was not complete. Because of that, he turned to face his pack, his gaze finding Nerissa. Now the truth had to be enthroned.
She watched as her former tormentors were led away, not with triumph, but with a quiet, hollow sense of release. The chains she had worn for a decade had finally, truly, broken. As the pack stared at her, their expressions shifting from suspicion to a dawning, uncertain respect, her heart still hammered in her chest. The fight was over. But what came next? What was she now? Then, Caden turned to her. In front of everyone, in front of the elders and the warriors and the families, he walked to her. The look in his golden eyes was stripped bare of all pride, of all authority. It was raw and open, and full of a remorse that stole her breath. He stopped before her and did something that made the entire pack gasp as one. He bowed his head. "I was a fool," he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every ear. "I let the ghosts of my past blind me to the truth standing right in front of me. I doubted you. I hurt you. And for that, I am sorry, Nerissa." He lifted his head, his eyes shining with unshed tears. A true bond is not just fated by the moon. It is forged in fire, and it is proven in trust. You trusted me, even when I did not deserve it, and I will spend the rest of my life earning that trust back. Her chest ached with an emotion so powerful, it felt like it could shatter her bones. Before she could find her voice, he held out his hand. "Your place was never in the shadows," he said, his voice growing stronger, ringing with the pride of an alpha claiming his queen. "It is here, beside me." As if in a dream, she placed her hand in his fingers wrapped around hers, warm and strong, a perfect fit. He led her through the parting crowd, up the steps of the great hall, and to the massive, carved throne. But he did not have her stand before it. He sat, and then he pulled her down to sit beside him, on the furs of the alpha's seat, as his equal. He leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear, his whisper for her alone. "My Luna." A shudder of pure joy ran through her. She looked out at the sea of faces, at the entire world that had once scorned her and saw only respect. She turned to the man beside her, the wolf who had answered the call of her own soul, and she smiled. "My Alpha," she whispered back. The pack kneeled, and in the heart of the lodge, surrounded by her people, wrapped in the arms of her mate, Nerissa, who had once been nothing more than a maid, finally, truly, knew she was home.